Are you in Delhi, Shiv?
Good evening and a welcome to all our speakers. Sorry, come. Let's start our evening session. Good evening and a warm welcome to all our speakers and our audience to Tata Literature Live Business Shastras. I am Reena Agrawal from the Literature Live team. The Right Choice, Resolving 10 Career Dilemmas for Extraordinary Success is the book we are discussing today with author Shiv Shivakumar, one of India Inc.'s longest serving CEOs. Mr. Shivakumar will be in conversation with strategic HR advisor Hema Ravichandar and Aparna Piramal Raje, writer and columnist for Business and Design. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us online for this very useful and pertinent conversation in these changing times. Before I invite Aparna to take this evening forward, may I remind all you listeners to send in your questions for the Q&A segment at the end of the session. 5 questions win gift vouchers from Tata Click. So bring them on. Over to you, Aparna.
Thank you so much, Reena, and thank you, Tata Lit Live, for having us all here. It's really a pleasure. Shiv, it's been about 5 years since we last met, and of course we had the privilege of meeting in person at that time, where I did a feature on your office for my column in the Mint. And if you remember, I had talked about the number of well-stocked bookcases that you had and the pile of handwritten journals with notes in it. And I also ended the article by saying it's quite likely that one of the management books on your shelf in future would be authored by you. So how do you feel now that you've got your first book out?
Absolutely. So I think it's terrific to write a book. It's a lonely journey. It's a lonely journey to write it. It's a lonely journey to market it. It's a lonely journey to sell it. And to have done all this in the pandemic, I don't think I would have ever done it in any other way. But I'd really like to thank Tata Lit Fest, Harish Bhatt, my friend, and everybody associated with Tata Lit Fest, and you, Aparna, as well as Hema, for being on the call this evening. It's an absolute delight to do this.
Thank you. And thank you, Hema, also for being here. We've been fellow columnists at the Mint for a long time, so it's nice to share space in another capacity. So Shiv, let's dive straight into it. Your book mentions 10 dilemmas. Which of these is the most common? Why is it so common? And how would you go about resolving it?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Aparna. So if you look at the dilemmas, I listed 10 in the book. The most common one, believe it or not, at every level, at junior level, middle level, and senior levels, has to do with money. Money is possibly the most common denominator of all dilemmas of anything. It's the mother of all dilemmas. Let me put it that way. Now, question, why is it so? I think at one level, at a junior level, it is hurried aspiration. I want to have the holiday. I want to have a car. I want to have a gadget. I want to quickly build a roof over my head, things like that. Okay, so that's what it is. Second, right or wrong. Okay, people are using money as a measure of self-worth. And I think a lot of that has to do with what we get fed in media and content. We see CEO salary is so much. This guy has earned so much by this age, etc., etc. So some of those astronomical numbers, people are saying, yes, if that guy can earn so much, why can't I? Or if she can do it, why can't I do it? So I think as a measure of self-worth. Third, I would say is as a measure of risk mitigation. Any risk you take, a change in job, a change in industry, a change in a role, etc. As long as there is money, you want to justify it to yourself. I'm going for this company, but you know what? The money is good. It is as if money will take care of the risk that you are taking. So that's the other reason I think so. And finally, I think at middle and senior manager levels, money is a dilemma or an issue in terms of providing. What do I provide for my family? What do I provide for my elders? What do I provide for my kids? What do I provide for my retirement? That's the big one which I see. I'm not a great believer in that. The Beatles said many years ago that money can't buy you love. I think money is a hedge against sorrow. It doesn't buy you happiness. It doesn't get you happiness. Okay. And if I look at specific examples, I just had a very young boy in my team going across and joining a startup company. So I talked to him. He talked to me. We have a very open relationship. Even when he went for the interview, he talked to me. I said, Ekansh, have you considered everything? He said, yeah, Shiv, they are offering me 3 times the salary that I'm getting right now. I said, is that very important? He said, Shiv, if it doesn't work out, I'll go do an MBA or I'll go to some other company. But I've set a new benchmark. And whenever I ask people why are they changing a job, etc., invariably, what do they tell me? Okay, money is good. They're paying me more. Number one, their perks are better. They're giving me a bigger car. They're giving me a bigger house. So in whichever way you think about it, material benefits, actual cash out, or whatever it is, I think money is the mother of all dilemmas for people.
So how does one resolve this? Because in the book, you said that particularly young people should look at companies where they maximize their career and their learning rather than trying to multiply their earnings.
That's a great question, Aparna. If you actually look at careers of individuals, most of the savings that you generate is after 40 or 45. Till about 40, 45, you are actually breaking even and having very little saving. So many times, and I tell this to very young people, why are you changing jobs for 5,000 rupees when you're 27, 28 and 30 for what? You're not building runway for takeoff. You're going to stutter and stutter and stutter. And that's why you'll find a number of people who've changed jobs, or multiplied jobs in the first 10, 15 years of their career. Very few of them actually achieve takeoff velocity. And then they're in the small company circuit, or then they become independent or whatever happens. If you really look at successful people with successful careers, they've had reasonably long stints in some good companies, which gives them that momentum and takeoff. Okay, if you don't do that, not worth it. So I would really say build experience, build learning capability, build reputation, money will follow you.
Well, that takes me very nicely to my next question, actually, Hema, which was, what is the recommended tenure for young people wanting to join a company? Because that's actually one of the other very common dilemmas. How long should you stay with a company? I think you need to unmute.
Thank you, Apu. I just want to step back a minute and tell Shiv how much the book resonated with me. The industry change dilemma, the sabbatical dilemma, the getting to be a boomerang dilemma, and the board dilemma. So it's really a privilege to be here to speak with you. And I thank Harish and Tata Litfest, and of course, Aparna, my dear friend, for having me here. Now, as far as the tenure goes, honestly, it is not my remit to say what is the exact number of years, but I would put it with certain guardrails. So the first guardrail is, I think, learning. And if you are learning, you stay in the job. And if you are resumeable, if you have career resilience built in, if you are constantly improving your skills, knowledge, and aptitude, I think you stay in. I'm reminded of Tom Peters, who very rightly looks at a 10-year experienced person who's stepping off a company, and somebody tells him there goes 10 years of experience. And he says, is that 1 year multiplied 10 times, or is it 10 new years? So I think career resilience and learning is very important in deciding whether you're staying in the job or not. The second is you have to love it. Again, you are, I'm going to hazard a guess, but every one of us spend more than 2/3 of our waking hours in the job. And if you're not loving it, then what are you doing? And, Steve Jobs, I was reading one of his quotes, and he says it so beautifully. He says, if you're in a job, make a great show of it, make a great output of it, make a great product out of it. And you can't do that unless you really love it. So I think loving it is important. So learning, loving. And the third is that, Shiv has mentioned this very beautifully in his book. He says a career is lived forward, but understood backwards. And usually once you're done with it. And I love that. That's a quote I'm going to keep with me always in my notes. And so it's a bit like planning your marathon. And while it's not easy to do it, there are some small ways to do it as you go through it. And that is having small milestones and large milestones. And if this job is giving you what you had planned for in terms of small and large milestones, I think you should stay in it. So learning, loving, and lapping the marathon. These are my 3 key takeaways in how long you should stay in a particular job.
So that's interesting. Both our panelists seem to agree that definitely the financial aspects are not the only criteria, and there are many more aspects that one should look at. Now, Shiv, you've also mentioned in the book that one should never leave a company when one is unhappy with it. But yet the instinctive reaction for most people to leave is when they're unhappy with their bosses. That's actually a very, very common phenomenon. So how should one resolve this dilemma if you're working for someone who you really don't like to do so, but you want to get out of that situation? Should you or should you not?
Okay, a great question again. So if I look at it, let's ask ourselves, what are the attributes or dimensions of unhappiness at the workplace? Simple, let's start with that. I think invariably I've noticed unhappiness is at its highest at the annual appraisal time. Okay, that's when it is at highest. Okay, so you believe you have done better than what your boss or the company thinks. Then annual increment time is another time when you are unhappy. So appraisal happens by, let's take March, increment happens by June, July. You've planned everything based on a certain assumption of your increment. It has not happened, so you get one unhappy. Then you're unhappy because of your peer group. Your peer group has a certain behavioral pattern, either they include you or exclude you, whatever it is, and you're unhappy because of that. You're unhappy because of your boss. That's one of the reasons. You believe your boss doesn't understand you, or your boss is not your sponsor, or he's not backing you. That's the other reason. Next, you don't get a promotion when you think you deserve it. Okay, and invariably all of us think we deserve the promotion well before we got it. Okay, so everybody has that same fatigue. So promotion. Next is you're not put on specific project teams in the organization which are high profile and you feel left out. Okay, that's the other reason you might this thing. Sometimes you might feel peaked and want to leave because you've not been sent for a coveted training program, which you've looked at, which is an important training program, etc. And finally, and remember I've said this finally, culture. Because you know what? You know the culture of the place within 6 months. If you are telling somebody I don't like the culture after spending 5 or 10 years there, then that's surprising to me. Because you should have figured out the culture, etc. in 6 months' time. Next, why is it easy to say that I'm leaving because of the boss? Because that's an answer which everybody loves to hear. Okay, nobody will challenge you on that. So it's very easy to say that. Okay, so here's what I would say. Going back to my first point about appraisals. Let's assume you have a 30-year career. You won't get outstanding or excellent in all 30 years. You might get 10, you might get 12. You might get good in another 10, 12. You might get average in maybe 5, 6. And the sport example I'd give you is take Roger Federer and Djokovic. Each of them has played 31 Grand Slam finals. And each of them has won 20 Grand Slam finals. In the 11 where they didn't win it, which was a winner takes all, they finished second. But it's not that they didn't give it their best. But it was not their day. So similarly, when you look at your appraisal or increment or promotion, etc., think of Federer and Djokovic and say, there'll be some years which I will not get, what is due to me. For example, I remember in Unilever in 1994 or 5, I had one of the best years leading a sales team. Everybody who worked with me got outstanding rating. I didn't get it. I was really angry and unhappy, but I never for a moment did I think that I should leave the company. Okay, that doesn't work in my book at all. So I think the other reason why you should think about it is when you're unhappy, every choice outside looks very promising and very positive because you're coming from an unhappy mindset. On the other hand, if you're happy, then you're moving to a company or moving a role or whatever it is, then you're making a very considered decision to say, I'm better off. So I would say in many organizations, unhappiness is a state of mind for a few months, but every 2-3 years, everything in the context and the system and the boss and everybody changes. So I would say just, grin down, bear it, you'll be fine.
Okay, interesting. So just to pick up on that, you talked about the shape of career arcs. And I think in the book also you mentioned about how careers have actually got zigzag patterns. There are spells of stagnation. There are periods of rapid growth. But frankly, if on the outside, Shiv, when someone looks at your career, it looks like a very steady ascendancy. You started off as a management trainee. You've been a managing director now for more than half your career. So it's been this upward climb up the corporate ladder. So tell us how you reconcile what you've written with what actually appears from the outside.
Yeah, so no career is a straight line. Okay, those days are over. I think that was the old hierarchy model. Okay, if you look at it very simply, and Hema would be a much better person to talk on this. All organizations have delayered in the last 15 years. Earlier you had 15 layers maybe in a company, or 12 layers. Today you have 5 layers. So even assume that you have a 30-year career. In each layer you're going to spend 3 to 5 years, right? So automatically you go, you're stable for some time, go to the next level, etc. I think that's how careers work today. And I think it's not about, having a steady progress as much as are you steadily learning, are you steadily contributing? Okay. Everybody wants to be a young something. People want to be a young CEO, people want to be a young CHRO, people want to be a young CFO, etc. I was a young chief executive. The question I have is, okay, you become a young chief executive or a CHRO, what will you do for the next 25 years? Ever thought about it? The pressure then is even more than what it is. So I don't think in today's structures of layers, structures of matrix organizations, structures of how work is organized, I don't think there is a study every 2-year promotion, every 2-year ascendancy. I think right through every single level, you need to grow intellectually. I think you need to grow culturally by being adaptable. And a lot of the world sees progress as titles. Progress is not titles in my book. Progress is intellectual progress, curiosity progress, and cultural adaptability progress. Those are more important. As long as you have that, you will keep getting jobs. Even if you're 60, you're 65, you'll keep getting meaty assignments and roles right through your career.
But did you have phases of stagnation in this zigzag? Did you feel the zigzag yourself?
Absolutely. At every stage. I was a senior brand manager for, I think, 3-4 years. You ask anybody, were you ready for the next move? They'll say, I was ready 3 years ago, 1 year ago, 4 years ago. Before I got the CEO offer, I was headhunted maybe 2-3 times for the CEO job 2-3 years before. But I didn't like the company. I didn't like the job. I didn't like whatever it is, didn't take it. Okay, so you will go through that. It's only natural. Just as you will go through failure in life. Okay, failure and success go hand in hand. There's nothing called one success. And at different levels, you'll be at one level. At one level, you can say, I've been a CEO for half my life. One way of looking at it is you stagnated at the same level, right? That can be a valid comment. But the fact is, I have grown intellectually with the role and I've learned something new. That is more important for me.
Hema, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, as a segue, I just wanted to, of course, to decide when to move, or if it's your boss or if there's the culture, whatever it is. There are some questions that you can keep at the back of your mind, and I found these very helpful. One is changing the job at this point a help or a hindrance to your career? Second, is change for the right reasons? Third, can you assure your next employer that you're not a high-risk hire? And fourth, do you have clarity on what you need in your next role? And when we're looking at career changes, I find that it's not just the people who have a safety net of financial security, etc. Even first generation employees who have a lot of debt, who have to bring a roof over their heads, even such employees, youngsters, are making risky moves. But I hope they will ask these questions when they make that change. Maybe financials will be high on their priority list for obvious reasons, but sometimes it is also good to have the larger framework in mind. That's just what I wanted to add.
In fact, I'll add to what Hema just said, empirical evidence. You look at evidence, anybody who has an EMI component, more than 25% of his or her take-home salary is in the job market every month. You know why? They're scared of the 25%. They want to reduce that to 10% and feel comfortable. That's the reason they're doing it.
So Hema, there's this notion of the jungle gym career. This is an idea that was popularized by Sheryl Sandberg in her book Lean In. Partly you've answered the question already, but do you believe that these pivots will happen as we live longer and longer lives? Like we're going to live, we might live to 80 or 90. We're going to be working for, let's say, 50, 60 years, not just, 30, 40 years. We're going to be working a lot longer. So do you think that we're going to be living these careers where we shift identities? And
I totally agree. I totally agree. It is going to happen. Work-life extensions, and I'm not talking work-life balance, but work-life extensions is going to happen. And you may go from being an executive to being an entrepreneur to being an evangelist of a social cause, of whatever you want to be. You can even become from bureaucrat to corporate, bureaucrat to politician, corporate to politician, lateral entry into the government. So all kinds of movements are happening, and it's very, very interesting to see that. It may be excitement, it may be economic reasons, or it may be just ikigai, whatever it is. But I think people are making that move. But when you're doing that, there are certain things that I think you need to keep in mind when you're navigating. And Shiv says this in the book also, that many times careers that flounder is because they didn't get people that they had advice with, or they had. So I think it's important for people to have not just a sponsor in a company. And we were talking on the email about the article you had sent, where everybody needs a mentor or a sponsor, etc. But those come from the company. I'm thinking of people having 4 or 5 key think points or think helpers around from industry who can actually help them navigate their career. And it's not easy to get it, because you have to make a mark with that individual and then do it. But if you can have those kind of 4 or 5 people who give you advice. Second, if you can remain constantly occurrent with the external world. And, I have an issue here. Men probably do this a little bit more than women, because women tend to come back to the home. There's the home pressures, etc. So after they finish their college, there is a tendency to not remain as occurrent with reading, with industry association work, or with anything that's happening in competitor benchmarking. So I think remaining occurrent is very, very important. And the other thing is, I feel people need to consciously invest in upskilling. In fact, if you look at millennials, one of the first things that they are now saying is that they'd rather invest in upskilling rather than in mutual bonds, etc., etc. Because if you have this long work life or work living, how are you going to keep yourself relevant? And fourth thing is, you need to have a T-shaped career. So you can have breadth across industries, breadth across functions, but there should be one area which is your core area. Is it HR domain? Is it IT enabling companies? Is it change management? Because then whatever industry you go to, whatever kind of role you play, that functional help or that functional expertise comes in handy. And finally, and this is only what, at childhood we must do this, mentors must do this, inherently you must do it, you must have self-belief. And if you don't have self-belief, then when you make these jumps, you become tentative, diffident, and you may stop doing that, Jimmy.
So that's really interesting. And I firmly believe in the idea of the T-shaped person, and have tried to share that with my students too. Shiv, I'd like to pick up on this point that Hema talked about of mentors and sponsors. One of the interesting things in your book is that you've included interviews with a lot of very experienced professionals, and many of them actually talk about the role of mentors. But now, of course, nowadays there's this talk of sponsors as being even more important as mentors. So while mentors offer you, advice and perspective, it's the sponsors who are actually offering you opportunities to advance within an organization. So what is your view on this sponsors versus mentors? How have they been important to you in your career?
Yeah, I think it's important to have mentors, and I would distinguish between mentors in the organization and mentors outside. Mentors in the organization by and large typically come from your line function or your teams or whatever it is, or senior managers who've seen you and feel that you have potential. Okay, it's good to have that. Today in most organizations, we say that we will offer mentorship, but we are offering mentorship only to high potentials. And in my book, that's a mistake. Because think of every organization's capacity or capability as a room, where the average is the floor and the high potentials are the ceiling. When you invest more in high potentials, this goes up, this stays here. So it widens the gap and creates much more hassles and a lack of trust in the organization. I'm a great believer that you must invest in both and move it so that the gap never narrows. The gap, stays where it is. So I'm a believer that you need to offer mentorship to various people. If you're a senior leader, you should do that. there are many groups where we have started mentorship in various companies. Young people have mentors, women have mentors, functional mentors, business mentors, all kinds of things. I don't think you can separate a mentor from a sponsor. I think many times the roles overplay. Okay, and which is a subset of what you can debate in the company and the situation you're in. But if I were to take it away from the organization and look at outside of the organization, and let's look at sponsors outside of organizations, I think all headhunters are sponsors. If a headhunter is calling you and placing you before a company, he's your sponsor, right? That's why he's calling you. Otherwise, his reputation or her reputation is always at stake. Ex-bosses are sponsors. Why does an ex-boss call you and say, hey, you know what? There is this opening. I was on this board. They were discussing this. Would you be interested in the situation? Okay, so that's ex-bosses. I think colleagues are great sponsors. There are many colleagues, especially at junior level. In junior levels, when people move companies, then they'll find openings and they'll call their friends and say, hey, you apply. This is fine. New industries need sponsors. Okay, and bunches of people land up there. For example, when PepsiCo started, it had two bunches of people. It had people from Unilever who came and recruited other people. It had people from ICI who came and recruited other people from ICI. Okay, so the peer group, the collegiate group becomes, in a way, your sponsor. But in every organization, here's what I would tell you. You cannot get a good mentor. You cannot get a good sponsor if you are not outstanding at your work and you're not working for the organization. Remember that nobody will want to sponsor a renegade. Nobody will want to sponsor an individual, hero or, somebody who chases glory. They will want finally their pick to be an organization man. That's what it is.
Yeah, and yes, go ahead, Hema.
No, I so agree with that. You can be assigned a mentor, but a sponsor has to choose you. In fact, when I coach people, sometimes they say, Hema, I want a sponsor in the organization. I always tell them, by your track record, you have to have people betting on you. And that's the only way you can get good sponsorship. You cannot be assigned a sponsor. You cannot say, will you be my sponsor? The sponsor has to pick you up. That's a very, very important thing. And I so agree with what he said about only mentoring high pots. And I think if we want to mentor the next level of leaders also, not just the high pots, group mentoring is a very good way of going about it. And many organizations are investing in that because sometimes you're not able to do one-on-one, but then why not a group so that you get them up to speed? So that's another point that I just wanted to add it.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think that you cannot make shifts in your career now without the help of mentors. You need people who can really give you that unbiased advice. So yes, definitely. Hema, Shiv's book talks about the role of women in the workplace in many ways, whether it is about couples who are living apart because they both want to pursue careers, whether it is about women in the boardroom, women in the workplace in other ways. As a senior woman professional yourself, how do you think you've had the most impact and why?
I think it all comes from perspectives. Whether it was at IIM, where we were a minority, whether it was at Wharton when I was doing my EDP and that was also a minority, whether it was in the firms where I worked with, where I was probably one of the first women management trainees, whether it was in management councils or in the boardrooms. It's all about perspective. And it's perspective on what you reflect on what you bring to the table with regard to two big groups especially. One is the talent and 50% of the talent pool. And there are so many things that you can bring about, whether it is the policy enablers, whether it is training, whether it's the culture, whether it's role modeling, all of those. And sometimes it's also very nuanced things like the importance for women of a sacred Saturday. For us, for a working woman, a Saturday is so important. And if work spills into a Saturday, how much tough it is for her. Or whether it is about traveling alone in a train overnight with a first class eligibility. It is very tough. Or traveling late, etc. So some of these are very slight nuances. Sometimes it's more poignant. For example, I remember a case where an employee was shifting location to go to the US and her husband was in a public sector job. They had 2 small children. She was all excited about it. She had taken it and her husband threw in the towel and quit the job, hoping to get a job there because she was on an L visa and L2s could work. But he went at a time when it was down and he just didn't get a job. So suddenly moving to single income, spouse being at home, children in a new environment, the whole dynamics of the family changed and she had to come back. To many, it was a great opportunity that she threw away. But to many others, especially for women, we understand some of these issues and also the aspects of the long distance marriage or all of those things. So I think it's perspective. Also for customers, and Shiv's company, Nokia did it beautifully because from the employees, they got the women customers' perspective and they had a very strong focused initiative around that to see how women use a cell phone. That's quite different from how men use a cell phone. And that's the business perspective. And I'm very happy to say that in Titan last year, we had 4 out of the 12 as women, which is a full 33% of the board members being women. And a lot of their products are used and consumed by women. So it is the customer perspective too. So I think women bring a lot of learning and perspectives. It's not just for the employee segment, it's for the customer segment. And of course, it's for the societal segment.
So what is the single biggest achievement that you're proud of as a woman that you think you've been that the change that you've driven?
So I think, you see, diversity is a statistic. It is the mindset of inclusivity that you have to include in companies for it to be really. And I remember once I was driving the Infosys Women's Inclusivity Network and Nandan was giving a talk on strategy. And it was packed with women and we had no place for men in that talk. So one of the senior leaders, male leaders, told me, Hema, you have your I win. He used to call it I win. But ultimately, we win. And that's when I realized that for women's inclusivity to succeed, you have to enlist the men. They are the mentors many times. They are the majority of the managers. So it is not enough to have initiatives which are of, by and for the women without the majority. And I think changing that is the biggest impact I make today in any such initiative, which is any kind of minority focused. So bringing the majority into the stable, so to say.
That's great. As a mother of 2 boys, I can totally resonate with that. Shiv, your chapter on entrepreneurship is very engaging, and obviously this is a career option that many more people are thinking of that they wouldn't have thought about earlier. So under what conditions does it make sense to pursue this? Could you just reiterate a little bit what you've shared in the chapter? And have you thought about this, and why and why not have you pursued it?
Yeah, that's a great question again. India has the highest probability of people wanting to be entrepreneurs. I think 63.7% of all Indians surveyed, I think last year, said we want to be an entrepreneur. Okay. But I think it within you whether you will be an entrepreneur or not. I know it within myself that I'm an organization man. I'm very good working for a company. I'm not an entrepreneur type. If I had entrepreneurship in my genes or whatever it is, maybe I'd have tried something before. Okay. A lot of India, except maybe some parts of North India, a lot of India comes from the service class, from the education class and things like that. So entrepreneurship is not natural, in this thing, but it is something that people want to dabble. Okay. I think the newer generations have more access to whatever you can think of, capital, talent, people, etc., etc. And what I would say is you can easily make out if, you want to do something on your own. Do you have a reasonable idea which is different, which serves a consumer or a customer need? Most times I find that people have a copycat idea and they price it lower. Okay, that's the reason they want to be an entrepreneur. Okay, and also I think there is a fallacy that you're in control when you're an entrepreneur. And that's the reason why I think people do it. If I look at and build on the point which Hema made, I look at men and women. Okay, and I look at my own circle of friends and classmates, etc. Men are intensely competitive till they're about 40 or so, intensely competitive. Okay, they will never take pride in their classmates' achievements, their peer group achievement, etc. But after then they recognize that they are not going to hit it to the role that they aspired for. That's when they drop out. Then they drop out and they become a consultant, they become something else, they start doing something on their own. Women have a break earlier, a biological break because of children. And hence, after childbearing, a lot of women ask themselves, can I do something on my own? What can I do while I manage family, while I manage kids' education, etc.? So there are different times when both men and women consider entrepreneurship. Okay, it is an absolute fallacy that only young people are entrepreneurs. In fact, the bulk of the evidence says that it's actually older people who actually become much bigger and much better entrepreneurs. But today, I think capital is available, capabilities are available, technology is available. I personally think you will find more people. And when you look at whether it's junior managers, middle managers, the appetite for risk is higher today, Aparna, in India. And that is what is fueling this thing of, let me try it. I'll try it for 2-3 years. If it doesn't work out, I'm sure something will work out. I think risk is much higher today than 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I think being an engineer or being a doctor was, low risk and absolutely correct thing to do. Today, that's not so.
So are you gonna, so what's stopping you?
I think I'll be a terrible entrepreneur. So that's the reason.
Why is that?
I don't think I have it in me.
Okay. Hema, you engage with a lot of companies now. Are they struggling to get people back into the workforce, to the office place because of the whole, notion, the fear of COVID and the idea of the hybrid workplace? Do you think a lot of people are going to be tempted to become gig workers?
So in the knowledge economy, probably yes. But you see, if you take manufacturing, if you take pharma, if you take hospitality, if you take aviation, people have to go day in and day out to work. Of course, the corporate office can operate from outside and maybe. So in the knowledge economy, probably you will have people who have decided that, hey, listen, let me stay at home and try to do this, a phygital world. And 3+2 seems to be a sweet spot, which is 3 days at home and 2 days at work. But again, it is a privileged few who have a home, an office in a home, exclusivity in a home, and who are not having to manage in a very, very tough environment. For example, in ITES, I have colleagues who tell me that, many of the employees are using even a bed, with little props as their workspace. So many of them are dying to go back to work. But you see, there is the option, and it is a very hot talent market now, right now, as all industries will tell you. So if you like phygital, and the company is wanting to go completely physical, then the competitor is willing to give you phygital. You see, so it is definitely a buyer's market. But, Shiv talks again about this in his book, and I really enjoyed the book, Shiv, I must tell you. That's why I'm dipping into it so much. Our common friend, Harish Devarajan, talks about the quality of conversations. And the water cooler conversations are so critical. Even in the boardroom, when you're giving feedback, when you're giving maybe tough feedback, sometimes on the screen, it just plays out so horribly. But if you can discuss that over a glass of wine in the evening, or the nonverbal language cue that you give while you're giving that feedback gives the employee support, or the colleague you're giving it to support, it changes the dynamic so much, and that the screen doesn't do. You see, so I, for one, I'm looking forward to going back. I'm hoping to have my first board meeting physically very shortly. But I think in this hot talent market, you want virtual. Many companies are willing to say, take virtual.
Yeah. So I wanted to share a personal tip for anybody who out there who wants to become a gig worker. Like I've been a gig worker now for over a decade. I write, I teach, I speak. A lot of it is remote, a lot of it is in person also. But I have learned to prototype myself through platforms. I am no longer an employee of any organization, but I have prototyped myself through various platforms. These platforms could include the newspaper I write for, the university where I teach, the nonprofits where I work, the organizations like Tata Live where I speak. So, many different entities that I engage with. And I think this whole idea of being willing to prototype yourself and being open to different ways of working is something that I think is going to become more and more common. So that would be my 2 cents over there. Shiv, just one last question. Your book has a lot of practical advice on careers. So I'd like to end with a slightly philosophical note. One of your interviewees, Rohit Kale, talks about identity. And he moved careers, and the move, he said, forced me to develop my own identity as an individual and I learned a lot about myself on that journey. So how important is identity? Because we often link our professional identity to our industry, to our title, to our company, to our function. How do you develop an identity that transcends that? Or do you think that is not important, or is it important?
No, I think that's another great question. So I think the whole issue of identity and what you want starts actually with the values that you grow up with. So if you think of values, your parents instill some certain values in you as a family. Then your teachers, when you go to school or college, instill a certain level of value. Okay. Then your bosses instill some values, and then organizations on the whole institute values. So, and I'm only talking from a professional context of the workplace. So by the time you're at 30, 35 or whenever you are, these are the influences which you've had thanks to values on your identity. So then you ask yourself, am I an individual contributor? Am I more happy doing that? Or am I a collectivist guy? Okay, you come to some conclusion in your own mind as to what works for you and how do you do it. And that invariably will lead you to what drives you. Does money drive you? Does material benefits drive you? That position drive you? Does a brand name drive you? What drives you? Okay, so that becomes extremely important. In my own case, I would say what's mattered to me as an identity is contribution. I think contributing to my colleagues, contributing to the success of the team and the organization, contributing to society, and contributing to management education, which I'm passionate about. To me, I measure myself and my identity much more with that rather than the titles that I've had or the awards or anything like that. And I think the concept of identity takes time, Aparna. It's not that you are stuck with the same identity. I think you develop because your priorities change from when you're a junior manager to a middle manager to a senior manager. And hence, sometimes you will give up on some of your principles, okay, at some point of time. Sometimes you'll stick with your principles some point of time. Okay, so I've seen both happen in organizations. And I think the fundamental thing about identity is your behavior must mirror your identity. Okay, if you espouse that you have a particular value system and identity and you do the opposite, I think you will lose a lot of trust and you will be a very inauthentic leader. So that's the way I would think about the whole concept of identity and values and authenticity.
That's interesting. Yeah, I totally agree that it's an evolving process. Hema, would you like to add anything to this?
No, I think authenticity is really, really important. And I also believe that, when you love to work and when you do something that you're passionate about, you make a difference. But it must be something that resonates totally with you, and then that can become your identity. And when I did my MBA from Ahmedabad, there were two of us in my class who decided to go into HR. And IIMs were not really known for HR, but both of us were passionate. One of whom is Raghu Krishnamurthy, who was the head of HR of GE globally, and the other was me. So I think we took a road which resonated with us, and that helped shape our identity. And then I'm, of course, reminded of Robert Frost's words, two roads diverged in the woods. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And that has made the identity.
Yeah, I think it's something which is important, and I don't think it's something, frankly, that business schools really emphasize, because when we're at school, we're very much about finding that job and finding, as you said, the salary as we started off the discussion. But even myself, having made that shift from business to journalism, and even though my mother is a journalist, I still found it to a big shift in terms of identity. So. It's something to think about. Okay, so before we get into our audience Q&A, let's do a rapid fire round. We'll start with Shiv, okay? And we have to keep it as rapid as possible, okay?
Oh my God.
No, not to stress you.
Start with Hema, please.
Start with Hema. No, my questions are such that we have to start with you, Shiv. Okay, what is success, Shiv?
Success, as I said, contribution.
Contribution. What is leadership?
Leadership, being authentic.
Okay, strategy versus culture, which one?
Culture always.
Culture versus purpose, which one?
Purpose is a misused word. I would still pick culture.
Okay, good. How do you share negative feedback?
Be honest. Going back to authenticity.
Okay.
Say it straight as it is. People will trust you always.
Okay. Hema, what is success?
Contentment.
Contentment, nice. What is teamwork?
Passing the baton seamlessly.
Okay. How do you handle failure?
Introspect.
Okay. Trick question. How many people did Shiv speak to before joining the telecom industry?
If you've read it. The number is there.
The number.
I don't know. Now I don't remember that.
Just have a guess.
50?
200.
Oh.
So that is the amount of research one does before getting into the switching jobs. Okay, so now we'll move into our Q&A.
So he gets the hamper, right?
No, there's no hamper. Okay, so I'm starting with the audience Q&A. I'll start with the first 5 winners. Congratulations to them. We'll start with Sriram Srinivasan. He said, careers for individuals are built by mentors to whom he can look up to. Some are lucky since they consistently have someone to look up to. What's your advice to someone who has to grow despite this? Like maybe they may not have someone to look up to.
Yeah, that's a great question again. So all of us at some time or the other have what I call role models. They might not be mentors. Okay, I've had my own set of role models. So for example, if I look at my career, over time, my teachers were my role models when I was in school and college. Okay, when I started reading about business, etc., Drucker was a role model for the sheer intellectual capacity. Then Robert McNamara, I read McNamara's book. And one of the things I really liked about McNamara was his punctuality and attention to detail. He knew more about what the general wanted when he was Secretary of Defense than the general knew himself. Okay, so he was a role model. Obama, Gandhi, there are many role models you go through in life. Okay, saying, wow, these guys are great guys. They've done something. The advantage of having a role model, in answer to your question, is invariably when you're faced in a tough situation or in a dilemma, you ask yourself, what would my role model do? And you suddenly put yourself in the shoes of the role model and start thinking in terms of the essence of that role model. And that's what I'd advise for you. Next, I would say, if you're good, you will have your own share of people who will support you, who will back you. Do not worry about that. Everybody wants good talent in today's world. So aim to be good. Don't worry about whether somebody is there, as a godfather, as an umbrella looking after you. Don't worry. It will happen naturally.
Okay. So, and I think just to add to that, I think Shiv does a lot of summaries of books that he's read on LinkedIn. So you can always follow him on LinkedIn and get access to what he's reading. Another question from Sriram. Skills and capabilities seem to be measured through straight-jacketed job scope lens, which probably has become passé. How and when will the industry reconcile to this anomaly? And I think, why don't we have this question for Hema?
I think competency is a composite of knowledge, skills, and attitude. And I think successful and progressive companies have started looking at attitude very, very strongly. And attitude is not something you just pick up. Like Shiv was talking about authenticity. Now that's basic inherent value and attitude. And many companies say skills can be taught. Knowledge can be given. You can do pre-training and post-training tests to determine that. But the aspect of attitude has to be kind of garnered through your deep dive interviews, through your coaching, through your monitoring the person on the job, etc. So I think progressive companies are going much beyond knowledge and skills. They are looking at the third dimension. And I think that's a very good way to ensure that the overall holistic development of people is happening.
Shiv, you would agree with that, or is there anything you want to
add to it? I think, Sriram, you're right. You hit the nail on the head. I'll give you a very simple point of view and look at the stats and you'll get it yourself. If you look at the growth of the edtech industry in the last 1 year in the pandemic, people are paying through their nose for new skills. India is one of the few countries where degrees matter. I believe I give the concept of a degree about 5 years. Okay, it will finally be skills. And if you look at the World Economic Forum in terms of what do they say are the 3 critical skill stroke capabilities for the future? One is creativity, one is critical thinking skill, and third is complex problem solving. That is what is needed in the future world. They're not saying jobs, they're not saying, degrees.
And I'd add a fourth to that, resilience.
Okay, great. So that's a lot to aspire towards. Yashwani Mehra asks, what would you consider leads to a higher strategic outlook or a value add quotient? What is it that you can develop about yourself that would give you a better perspective in these areas?
That's a very good question again, and I've been asked this many times. I think the ability to think structurally about an issue which you're facing is a very important skill. And what is structural thinking? The ability to juxtapose opposite. What is failure? What is success? Okay, why does this happen? Why doesn't this happen? Why is this company successful? Why is this company a failure? The ability to think structurally and critically about issues is, I think, absolutely important. And anybody can develop this skill. The idea is not to be a negative, cynical person. The idea is not to be just playing devil's advocate, but the idea is to look at both the positives and the challenges. So in every opportunity is a risk, in every risk is an opportunity. So think of structural thinking like that.
Hema?
I have one point. I think you have to be comfortable in the beta mode. You cannot wait for full analysis, for everything to be perfect to move forward. This is a situation where we have to do things while flying. And this is what many startups are doing in their success. So the patchwork happens in the night, but you have to be comfortable in the beta mode. And many employees are not comfortable doing that. Till there's perfection, they don't send it out. So I think the ability to be comfortable in the beta mode is going to be a very big strength in the digital world going forward.
Balkrishna Shrigaonkar asks, once a process or job activities are completed from transition to run, would it be advisable to take new assignments within the organization or change the job with a defined time average of about 6 years? So this is sounds like a pretty specific question to a particular situation, but if you could give it a shot.
You asking Hema?
Yeah, why don't you go, Shiv?
Why don't you go? Okay, fair enough. So I would say the way I think about it always is that you should give a job or a company at least 3 to 4 years. And the reason I say that is, in the first year, you're learning, you're finding your way. In the second year, you're forming a very clear view of how you want to play that role. Then you implement your ideas, you implement your strategy, you implement your tactics. Then you'll see results in year 3 and year 4. And at least you will have the confidence that you've addressed the job in the best possible way. Okay? A rolling stone gathers no more, absolutely no mass. And this is a mistake which a lot of people do. You look at the number of resumes you get. Everybody says, I launched this brand. You are part of the launch of a brand. I launched this initiative. You're part of the launch of an initiative. You're not the guy who did it. You're not the girl who did it. You're part of it. And as long as you can think like that, I think you'll be fine. Specific question, I would not be able to say anything. Okay, that depends much on the context of that organization.
Yeah, I think Hema, I think the dilemma is it to take a new assignment within the organization or change the job, given that I might have been there 6 years already? It is a specific.
No, if there is a good enough role in the current organization, you have goodwill equity invested in the organization, and if you are being career relevant and resilient, then I would say go for it. But many times what happens is the IGP processes may not be that strong, the internal job posting or moving around circles. And your manager, who may be your mentor, who may be your sponsor, all of that may also get a little ruffled. So I would say, and launch is only one part of a job. And many people think that launch is done, now I don't want to do the execution. When you're being hired, you're also being assessed on how you executed after the launch. You see, so it's good to stay in there, but while you're getting a little bored or there's ennui, I would tell you to push the boundary and look out for other assignments in adjacencies or in other departments while you're in the job. And you can be part of cross-functional teams, you can be part of SWAT teams, you can build your competencies like that, you can build your networks like that, you can build your skills like that. And that's a huge goodwill that you will acquire, not just from your own team or department, but across the organizational boundaries.
Okay, so I think the Message is to try and look for opportunities for growth within the organization and keep in mind that you've been part of a larger team and not necessarily the person driving the change all the time. Okay, question from Raja Rao. I think for both of you, this is a very important question. With 2 years of the pandemic having disrupted thousands of career trajectories, what is the biggest challenge that people face today? And also how would they resolve it? I'm adding.
Go ahead, Hema. You start.
So I think one has to look at this at different levels in the organization. Of course, you can look at it differently for different industries, but the freshers, especially those who are coming out of their job, they're getting onboarded, they're getting selected, they're getting trained, everything without meeting another individual or colleague. And that's a big, big challenge. It's a social challenge as well. Of course, the jobs may be shrinking in many industries. So that's a challenge. For example, every time the industry has gone through the downturn, people who came out of campus in those years have found it very, very hard to get a job after 2-3 years when the industry picked up. At the middle level, again, it's managing. I think the Indian manager manages better for effort than for result. So suddenly you have all these people working virtual. You have to be very time management conscious. You have to ensure that you parcel the work out and do it, and appraise and reward for result and not effort. So the middle management, that's the challenge. And for the senior most management, it is black swan. So it's how, and I have written an article on this in the Mint, Aparna. It's about who stands up for the CEO. Everybody is looking up to the CEO. And the board is looking to him, the investors are looking at him, the employees are looking at him, the customers are looking at him. So the CEO also needs people who he can rely on, who he can reach out to, who he can share his vulnerabilities with. And that, I think, is the challenge for the CEOs.
Shiv, want to add?
Yeah, I would say number one, as a result of the pandemic, at every level, I think communication skill has gone up dramatically. And there will be a bigger premium on it in the coming days. Both the ability to speak without shouting on the web, ability to write succinct minutes or summary of the meeting, etc. So I think communication has gone up significantly. The next thing which has gone up significantly is horizontal way of working. Because digital is a horizontal capability. It's not a vertical capability. Okay, Indians have always been used to what people call vertical democracy. Okay, boss said, somebody else said, etc. But I think the web has taught us, the pandemic has taught us that horizontal democracy is getting more important. So getting people involved on the web and asking people, do you have a point of view, etc. I think it has forced senior managers to communicate and be available to their organizations much more than ever before. Earlier, people were happy doing a town hall once a quarter or once in 6 months or whatever. However, I would say resolving conflicts is a challenge. When you disagree in a physical meeting, you can always go out, put an arm around the shoulder of the guy or the girl and say, let's have a cup of tea. This is what I meant when I disagreed with you. But today, when you have back-to-back meetings, there is no chance for you to actually put that hand around and explain yourself. So I think conflict resolution is suffering as a result. The other thing I would say is organizations which have managed it well, I think have got more gratitude. Last December, I did 60 family calls with my direct reports and their direct reports. And I repeated that in June this year. And just to ask them, how did you handle the pandemic? Were any of your relatives impacted? How has ABG handled this? Are you happy, etc.? Do you have any questions to ask me? It was just amazing, the outpouring of gratitude in terms of the policies which the company had employed, with the freedom which people had got in terms of work from home or work from anywhere or remote, etc. So I think organizations who handled it well, I think have improved the trust, have improved loyalty. Okay, I would not be able to speak for organizations which, haven't done that. And the last comment I would make is that whether it's a combination of WhatsApp, whether it's a combination of email, whether it's a combination of web, our ecosystem and our ability to stay in touch with them, our ecosystem partners have appreciated that a lot. So I think life has changed. I think people recognize today that there is an alternate way. But the biggest change of all, from a business point of view, Aparna, is that digital has become a de facto business model. Okay, most organizations have been talking about it, have done nothing about it. Today, the consumer has gone digital ahead of the marketing guy, ahead of the sales guy, ahead of the CEO, ahead of the industry. So every industry today has a default business model called digital. And I think that is here to stay.
And from an employee perspective, Aparna, just one point, about 10% of the population in many companies took work from home. Many times ladies, there was a supercilious attitude about it. It was not really accepted. Suddenly in 3 weeks, 99% of the organization had to go digital. And that's such a big thing for the whole work from home concept and for widening the talent pool.
I'll tell you another learning, Aparna, which, sometimes we don't give enough credit to. The worldwide IT systems have worked. Think about it. Imagine if this had happened 10 years ago, the world would have collapsed. Today, across the world, every IT system has worked. Every search engine has worked. Nothing has fallen apart. Yeah. Okay, so we should really thank the digital, revolution which has happened over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing, and I think what we need to really recognize is that this is a fundamental paradigm shift, and we are not going to go back to the way things were. But just to build on the question, because I think it is an important nuance, is how does leadership get translated effectively to the remote way of working? In your experience, Shiv, you've talked about communication, you've talked about gratitude, you've also talked, Hema, about resilience. But how does, as a leader, all the things that leaders used to do, how do they translate that effectively to the remote way of working?
Absolutely. So when you sit in a physical room and talk to people, you can make out the interest levels and whether they're nodding, they're agreeing with you, disagreeing with you. Body language is an important aspect. In a digital world, you can never make that out. So I really have to ask people. And I've made many mistakes too. Let me tell you, for example, one of the teams I was leading, I was pulling them up because their work was not good. Okay, their work was substandard. I wanted to raise the bar in terms of how they were thinking about it. So after the call, again, I asked feedback. I asked one of the boys, hey, what did you think of the meeting? He said, Shiv, if you don't mind, I want to tell you something. If you want to be tough on us, please don't do it on web calls. I said, why? What happened? He said, my parents were sitting in the room and I felt very bad that you pulled me up and my parents heard it. I said, my apologies. I didn't realize your parents were there. I thought you were in a room where, I was in a room and we were able to talk about it. So you have to learn that the context in which people are experiencing you has changed significantly. And if you're not able to understand that and play to it, I think you'll make more mistakes than less mistakes. And a simple rule I would tell you is that whatever you did in the physical world, forget it. I think you need a new vocabulary, you need a new body language, you need a new communication toolkit if you want to work in a digital world.
Great.
Ken Blanchard, long time ago in the 1 Minute Manager, said praise in public and criticize in private. To Shiv's point, that criticize in private was what the employee was saying. And he would have probably done it in the physical world. But at that time, in that virtual world, you have to remember that parents may be there in the room. So you have to change the paradigm in your mind, the way the content is going to be consumed. And I think that's the critical thing.
Sure.
One other thing I must add, Aparna, before I think this, I have promoted more men, and both in PepsiCo and Nokia, I had 40% of my team as women. The pandemic has put more pressure on women.
Yeah.
Okay, they have worked longer, they have multitasked much more, they are responsible for a lot more. There are a lot of women who have told me, you know what, when I come to office shift, I didn't have the job of putting hot rotis on the table at 1 o'clock. Okay, I didn't have the job of XYZ. On an average, productivity has gone up dramatically in the last 1 year. People are working 3 hours more and women are working more. I think that's not a good sign. So that is something which I think all of us collectively should do to correct.
And on an average, a woman sleeps 2 hours less than men.
Okay.
Especially a working woman. And the industries that have been hit are ones which have primarily, women workforce. So it's also known as a she-session, not a recession.
Yeah, that is very worrying. Even in my house, I had to literally inform everybody in this room to be quiet so that I could occupy the living room for this session. So it was like that. I saw Reena. I'm going to close up now, but I just wanted to acknowledge a question from Anthony, who is our 5th winner of the competition. So we don't have time for it, unfortunately, I think. But thank you. And before I hand over to Reena, I'd say we've had a really interesting session. We've covered topics right from what are the most common dilemmas to issues relating to women in the workplace, mentorship, sponsorship, zigzag careers, junk careers, and many aspects related to how we all progress. So I hope everyone gets a chance to have a look at Shiv's book and shares feedback with him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hema. It was good to see you after a long time. The last time I saw you was on a flight to Bangalore.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aparna. You can now become an astrologer. You can say whatever I predict happens 5 years later. I predicted Shiv will write a book, and 5 years later it's happened. So people will, follow you now as an astrologer.
So now I predict that Shiv will become visiting faculty at many universities.
Thank you for that. Thank you both of you. You're wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Aparna. But could you read out Anthony's question so that those who are listening in will give them something to talk about, to think about before I go ahead?
Yeah, Anthony's question was, you have said money should not be the criteria for job change. However, as they say, religion, or in this case, careers, cannot be taught on an empty stomach. Your thoughts? That was his question. Does anybody, do we have time?
Compensation is always a hygiene factor in most employee sat surveys. So yes, it is important, and it depends on where you are in the career hierarchy or ladder. I'll leave it at that.
I think Shiv has said quite a lot about it already. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Aparna. Thank you so much, Mr. Shivakumar, Hema, and Aparna. This conversation has been such a reassuring conversation because there's so many of these thoughts that have been going through all our minds, and I'm sure the youngsters, having 2 young working daughters, I think there's so much that you have kind of put into perspective. So thank you so much for your book, for all your insights and the questions, Aparna, you fielded with the fantastic experience both Hema and Mr. Shivakumar have given. So thank you so much. It was really put into perspective and very rightly said, a shift in paradigm in our thinking. And I think teaching sociology, I see sociology of work, sociology of organization and culture. Bottom line, attitude, culture. Honestly, I thank you so much for bringing it all up. Before I end today, may I request all our winners for your lovely, very insightful questions. Sriram Srinivasan, Yashwani Mehra, Balkrishna Shirgaonkar, Rajaran Anthony, to please write into us at tatalitlife.in, send us your email, and a book that's going to come from Mr. Shivakumar is the book that we discussed today, The Right Choice, will be at your doorstep. Thank you once again, everyone.
Thank you, Tata Litfest. Thank you, Harish. Thank you, Aparna. Thank you, Reena. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Hema. It's absolutely really enjoyed it. Wonderful art. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night. And see you all next Business Shastras.